Good day, everybody, and welcome to the IEEE SUSTECH webinar series on technologies for the circular economies. I'm Wei Jianli. I'm co-chair with Mikey Lucan on the FDC SUSTECH initiative. And Carol Grass she is the program director of the IEEE SUSTECH. So when we talk about the circular economies, historically, we try to do a traditional linear mode. We take, make, and dispose. So which is no longer viable. So in the current approach that we would like to emphasize is the reduction, reuse, refurbishment, and the recycling. So of the product and materials. So on this one, that we would like to promote the circular economies. And from the role of the IEEE, we would like to ensure that our response to the climate change is substantial, appropriate, and properly engaged IEEE, its members, and larger technical professionals. So IEEE will provide a neutral platform for the collaboration, and we will function as a technology provider. So for the webinar series, this is the brought by Future Direction and the SUSTECH initiative. Okay, so we intended to broad audience, not only to the engineers, technical community, and we also like to have the industry, regulator, policymaker, and community shareholders engagement. For the general community, with an interest in climate change, sustainability, clean energy, and the industry, the health of the planet, its resource, its ecosystem, its inhabitant, and the related topics. We serving the need of the profession and the public by increasing awareness and understanding of the technologies. So this live webinar series starts with the why circular economy are needed. Until today, that October the 9th, that we invited Dr. David Snyder talk about the restoring and the atmosphere by removing excess CO2 using natural way. The next one, in the November 6th, we are going to discuss the reusing and the recycling battery with the Dr. Babu Chalamala. Okay, so here is the registration. That one registration give you all the access of entire series. And this, the Dr. Chalamana's presentation will be the last presentation of this first series. So we are looking for your input and your suggestion for the new idea or suggested idea for the 2026. And if you have any desire or if you have any topics that you would like us to address, please put that information in the chat. So today's talk is as I have mentioned, we are talking about restoring the atmosphere by removing excess CO2 using a natural way. And it will be presented by Dr. David Snyder. He is the COO of the DeepGreen Solutions. And he is a California registered civil engineers, certified information system security professional, and IEEE Senior Member. He is helping to derive the effort of the DeepGreen Solutions to develop and implement technology to replicate the natural process, whereby the growth of the phytoplankton in the open ocean is stimulated to remove large amount of the CO2 from the atmosphere worldwide through the photosynthesis. Davis is the board chair of the IEEE Consultant Network of the Silicon Valley and has been the organizer, moderator, or speaker for more than 20 conferences and seminars, including the Security Standard and Law session of the 2024 IEEE World Technology Summit on AI, and present implementing climate restoration this decade at the 2025 IEEE Sustainable Technology Conference. And again, please go to the link, and one registration will give you access to the whole series. Let's welcome Dr. David Snyder. Okay, David, it's yours.
Okay, I do not see. All right, there. I'm in presenter mode. So, good morning.
No, you are not. You are not sharing. You
I
have
will
to go
share in a
to.
moment, but just to say
Okay.
hello.
Okay.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Uh, I am located in Silicon Valley, near San Jose, and the presentation I'm going to give today is an adaptation and an update from that presentation I gave at the Sustainable Technology Conference in April. So let me go ahead and share. So DeepGreen Solutions is a nonprofit that I will be describing for you. We formed in May of 2025, and it's based on work that I'll be describing how this concept came about and where we're going with it. So personally, my story starts with Earth Day 1970 when I was a freshman in college. And this was a big deal back then. The news reports were that 20 million people, 10% of the population, got involved in one way or the other in teach-ins, in demonstrations, to take note that something needed to be done. And from this, we got the Environmental Protection Agency and many of our current laws and standards. Well, I was at a liberal arts college at the time, but I was inspired, and a couple of years later, I started over in civil engineering so that I could focus. And one of the things I learned was goes back to Aristotle's comment, that which is common to the greatest number gets the least amount of care. People pay most attention to what is their own. They care less for what is common. And this is often described in the way of a common piece of pasture land in the center of a small town, where if a few people bring their sheep to graze, there's plenty to go around. But after a while, if more and more people use it, the resource can be destroyed. And in fact, we could say that we have been overgrazing the atmosphere. Bottom line, we need to reduce carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It's not the only greenhouse gas, but it is one of the significant ones and one that we can do something about. And replicating what happens in the ocean after storms and volcanoes seems to be the way to go. This is what I'll be describing today. So that's the Cuyahoga River on fire in Cleveland back in the 1960s. And we think we know what pollution looks like. Smog, fish kills, pesticides, overuse. But when we look at the air, it's a little harder to imagine. But what if you could see the carbon dioxide molecules and the excess methane molecules? Well, what we do have the ability to do is to monitor the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere with instruments. And this is the observatory on top of the Mauna Loa volcano in Hawaii, where measurements have been taken since 1958. This is what's known as the Keeling curve. They've been taking measurements there every year, in fact, daily. You'll see that it varies seasonally, but the trend is continuing upward. In pre-industrial times, the concentration in the atmosphere of carbon dioxide was in the neighborhood of 300 parts per million. Today, it's in the neighborhood of 420 parts per million. And we know from ice cores and other data that researchers have put together that temperature and carbon dioxide in the atmosphere have tracked very closely together for hundreds of thousands of years. But if you look in the recent tens of thousands of years, we suddenly, in our era, in the 21st century, have jumped up to 420 parts per million. We don't know how the temperature is going to track with that. We can't just do a linear projection, but we know we need to be concerned. Now, you may remember a diagram like this from high school biology or college talking about the carbon cycle. And we've often been thinking about it in terms of the atmosphere. But because the ocean is 70% of the planet, the ocean actually is a huge part of this system. And it's complicated. And there are lots of different models on how this process works. There's a lot involved: biology, physics, chemistry, meteorology, oceanography, geology. I put it all together sometimes and I think, it's carbonology. It's all of the above. And what partly makes it complicated is that carbon dioxide is in equilibrium between the air and the water. They call it the air-sea equilibrium or air-sea interface. And we'll be talking a little bit about what goes on in this system. But I don't want to go too deep into the marine biology. That's not my expertise. There are people who have done a lot of work on how this works, but I want to focus on the carbon dioxide part. We do know that carbon dioxide causes acidification in the ocean. You can see on the lower left there some of the chemistry. When carbon dioxide and water get together, it's a carbonate system. There's already evidence that globally the pH in the ocean has declined. It seems like a small number from 8.2 to 8.1, but it's a log scale, so it's actually significant. Let me talk to you for a minute about how the carbon cycle works in our atmosphere and in the ocean. Currently, human and other sources from land use change contribute about 40 gigatons, 40 billion tons of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere every year. A lot of that gets trapped in the atmosphere, and this is what's contributing to that increasing graph and the Keeling curve at Mauna Loa. About a quarter of it does get dissolved in the ocean, but as I show here, it's an equilibrium and it's a dynamic system. Now, forests and agriculture account for a certain amount of carbon dioxide being pulled down out of the atmosphere. But before you say, well, we just need to put more trees, there really is not enough arable land on the 30% of land on the planet to have enough of an effect to offset what's going on. And of course, the engineered solutions for removing carbon dioxide, such as direct air capture, are accounting for a tiny, tiny fraction. And for these to scale up would take a great deal. When you look at the concentration in the air today, here's some numbers that translate that into gigatons. And you can see that the difference between pre-industrial times and today is on the order of 1,000 gigatons. Keep that number in mind. As I mentioned, as carbon dioxide goes up, that's the Keeling curve in red, the PCO2, the partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the water, is going up, and as measured near Hawaii, the ocean pH is going down. There's also data from NASA that shows that the temperature of the ocean on average, or rather the amount of heat energy in the ocean, has been climbing. We know that when parts of the ocean get too warm, coral cannot survive. And coral is a hugely important foundation for a lot of life in the sea. We also know, and this is a little bit old data, but I think we still have a problem, that the amount of phytoplankton in the ocean has been declining. So here's where we're at. 300 parts per million was where we evolved and where we normally have lived in pre-industrial times. We're now about 420 or 430 parts per million, and there's been a corresponding increase in average global temperature. pH is decreasing, ocean acidification, ocean is warming. The ability of the oceans to absorb this carbon dioxide is being overwhelmed. We've got about 1,000 gigatons excess carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and about 60 gigatons of removal needs to happen from 2030 to 2050, and this is the project we're working towards. It's not just about emissions control. Emissions control will not be sufficient. So let's talk about how this natural process works. Back in the 1980s and 1990s, an oceanographer by the name of J.H. Martin realized that when dust storms occur over the ocean, there's an increase in phytoplankton blooms. Phytoplankton photosynthesis captures large amounts of carbon dioxide, and some of that carbon goes deep into the ocean as part of that carbon cycle. In addition to dust storms, iron is replenished in the ocean from volcanic activity, ocean upwelling, and whale poop. I think the volcanic activity has been very interesting for our research. Some of you may know of the Mount Pinatubo volcanic eruption that occurred in the Philippine Islands in 1991. Early in the day, in June 1991, it looked like this. It's kind of a nice postcard picture, but later in the day, it got pretty scary. And from satellites, you could see the ash distribution from that volcano in 1991. And I call your attention to the scale bar of 100 kilometers, which will come up later in some of this discussion. But that's ash blowing into the South China Sea. What was observed in 1991-92 was a pause in the carbon dioxide increase in that Keeling curve. And then after the effect wore off, the trend line resumes, as you can see in the upper right. One of the things that's notable about the Pinatubo eruption was it occurred in the vicinity of a downwelling eddy in the ocean. And these actually can be detected from outer space. They can be hundreds of kilometers in diameter, slowly circulating, caused by the currents in the ocean, so that what's at the surface gets transported deep into the ocean. This is an image of currents in the vicinity of the Philippine Islands, and the red box area shows where the volcano was. And you can see where back in January of this year, there clearly was a downwelling eddy offshore. And these downwelling eddies form and dissipate and go back and forth from time to time. We've done some research in our team to look not only at the Pinatubo eruption, but some other ones in history that occurred near bodies of water where downwelling eddies occur. And you see an effect on the carbon dioxide record from two of them, the Tambora and Billy Mitchell volcanoes, that seems to support this hypothesis. So let's learn from it. Phytoplankton are plants in the ocean. They're foundation of the food chain. They need iron for photosynthesis. Photosynthesis uses up carbon dioxide, and because iron sinks in the ocean, phytoplankton are largely iron deficient. But when you give them iron, phytoplankton blooms are observed. So, ocean iron fertilization from the Mount Pinatubo eruption is the most likely explanation of that observed pause in the carbon dioxide increase. Another name for this is phytoplankton-based carbon dioxide removal. And there's a group called Ocean Visions that is a collaboration of many different organizations doing research on carbon dioxide removal, and especially marine carbon dioxide removal. And they have a long paragraph talking about what they now call phytoplankton carbon solutions, of which ocean iron fertilization is one. But I think the real important sentence is that specifically ocean iron fertilization holds promise due to the theoretical scalability and potential cost effectiveness. Now, this is an evolution in the way things have been getting discussed that I've noticed just in recent months. There has been some skepticism about ocean iron fertilization, some concern about potential adverse impacts, and it's going to take large research efforts to figure out how best to do this. Something to keep in mind is that when you have phytoplankton blooms as the foundation of the food chain, we do see increases in fishery production. So that's a benefit of doing ocean iron fertilization. Our organization is working towards a pilot project. Not something we can do tomorrow, but we're working up to it. Basically, the idea involves sailing a vessel back and forth, repeatedly distributing small amounts of iron dust that causes the phytoplankton to be able to grow. By continuing to provide the iron, part of that carbon cycle allows nitrogen-fixing organisms to grow, which help to sustain the phytoplankton. And if you do this in a downwelling eddy, some of that carbon will be pulled deep into the ocean as the phytoplankton expire or other organisms expire or eliminate waste. We will use sensors on buoys to measure carbon dioxide across the project area and transmit that data. And we've been developing the arithmetic to reduce the data from the orbiting carbon observatory satellite that measures carbon dioxide at the surface. And also we'll be using sensors on uncrewed autonomous vessels sailing back and forth the project area to take additional measurements. That's the plan. It's not ready to do it large right now, but we're doing the work to get ready. One could postulate that a good place to try it out would be where it seems to have worked before. That's a 100 kilometer by 100 kilometer square approximately downwind from Mount Pinatubo in the South China Sea. If you superimpose that on that ash cloud from the volcano, you get the general idea of why we think that might be a good place to do this. And superimposed on the current information showing where there's a downwelling eddy, we know at least part of the year a downwelling eddy can occur right in that area. These buoys are about 16 inches in diameter, actually quite small. They're solar powered, they have GPS, satellite radio, and they measure wind, and we can mount carbon dioxide sensors on them. We would use a number of these buoys in that pilot project area to measure carbon dioxide as the project proceeds. And that blue line shows the path of the vessel that would be distributing the iron repeatedly across the 16 quadrants of the project area. You could find interesting information about the NASA Orbiting Carbon Observatory at the NASA website. It measures at the surface using spectrometers what the concentration of carbon dioxide is, and they can measure increases and decreases in carbon dioxide. Interestingly, the agricultural community is also interested in this data to be able to see how well plants are doing photosynthesis. So it's a low-risk project, actually, to start doing this research. It's repeating what normally happens when dust blows into the sea. The area for the pilot project is really quite small compared to the entire size of the ocean. And the amount of dust that we estimate is going to be needed is 1/100th of a gram per square meter, really quite small. And of course, we would do ecological baseline work in the project area to understand the habitats and species that are there, and then monitor during the project. Some of the measurements that we'll be taking include, of course, nitrate, chlorophyll, cyanobacteria, and indications of the biomass, and pH, but also possibly dissolved oxygen, dissolved inorganic carbon, fishery production, and perhaps other parameters, and these are still being worked out. Because we have to think about it in a disciplined way. Do I have the right numbers? That is, what to measure. Are we measuring correctly? And then what do these numbers tell us we need to do? Now, monitoring, reporting, and verification is a term that is often used to refer to measurements of carbon dioxide removal. And it's because there's this multi-step process to measure what's removed in order to report it to an accredited third party for the purposes of carbon credits. But we're a nonprofit. We're not in the carbon credits market. And the reason for that is ultimately, it's not, in our opinion, we don't see a way for that carbon credits market to scale up to the 1,000 gigatons a year, 1,000 gigatons removal at 60 gigatons per year, the rate that's going to be needed. The kind of monitoring we're planning is first of all focused on the effectiveness of the method, how much carbon dioxide is reduced. And of course, safety and benefits, the effects on habitats and species, and the benefits to fisheries and ocean pH. There's a concept of social acceptance or social license that's often mentioned, and we'll address this by complying with the environmental regulations, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Of course, monitoring is also can be done for carbon credits, and there's a lot of people working on this, and I just want to make it clear that our group is not focused on earning carbon credits, and we're also not focused on the how the marine biology works. We leave that for academic research, and there is certainly a lot of academic research going on today. But we're really focused on the first three things. One of the reasons we're not trying to do it all is an example from the pharmaceutical industry that a PhD in that industry explained to me, is that there are a couple of drugs that we can use as examples, such as metformin for diabetes and lithium for mental health, that we know are effective, and they have been used for years. And there have been clinical trials that have shown the effectiveness, but they are still doing research on how that works in the body. Similarly, if you were trying to protect your home or your commercial structure from an impending flood, you wouldn't study the surface tension of water on sand particles. You'd work on getting a lot of sandbags. So that's kind of the way we're trying to focus our attention. And we're approaching this in what I call walk, run, fly, a gradual process where we will be learning a lot as we go along and adjusting accordingly. We'll be developing our monitoring equipment and doing limited iron deposition to see what we can measure, and then gradually going to larger area tests, eventually needing to scale up in multiple regions. And practically speaking, I don't know that DeepGreen Solutions will have the resources to be able to do this at full scale by itself. Likely, we are going to be holding the lantern that lights the way to show the direction that others need to follow to scale up across the planet. One of the first things we're working on is an EPA permit, the Environmental Protection Agency permit, to be able to go out in the ocean west of California to do some of our testing of our monitoring equipment. And this has to comply with the Marine Protection Research and Sanctuaries Act, and that is incorporating considerations of the London Protocol that affects marine activity. Now, the London Protocol was originally developed to control disposal of waste material in the ocean. No one ever envisioned depositing small amounts of iron for a scientific or environmental adaptation purpose. And so we're having to work within a framework that was never really designed for this. Still, the EPA has outlined their requirements for marine carbon dioxide removal in what they want to see in a permit application. And they've already granted permit applications to a couple of other organizations for ocean alkalinity enhancement and in a biomass effort. And so we have an outline to follow. So we're working on that application. This year, in addition to forming the nonprofit, we have tested our buoys with the CO2 sensors. We're continuing to do that. We've developed the math to reduce the data from the orbiting carbon observatory satellite. We've prepared papers on the underlying science and methodology. Of course, as mentioned earlier, there was a presentation at the IEEE Sustainable Technology Conference in April and some other events. We've met with the EPA. We had a gracious donation of $100,000 to help support the initial work, but we will be needing more to continue. And just last week, we exhibited at the Oceans 2025 Great Lakes in Chicago that was sponsored by the IEEE Oceanic Engineering Society and the Marine Technology Society. So this quarter, the end of 2025, we're going to be continuing to work on the buoys and sensors. We need to work on securing funds to do some lab testing this quarter if we can, both physical testing of how the iron dust formulation that we'll use actually behaves and how the different species of phytoplankton respond. We'll be working on that EPA approval. Their minimum review process is 6 months, and it can take longer depending on other agency input and public comment. During that review process, we will work to secure another 500,000 to be able to do that initial equipment testing in the ocean west of California. And that will include a small amount of iron under that EPA permit. Then, of course, there needs to be further testing of effectiveness and safety at larger scales once we've demonstrated that it can be done safely. And ultimately, we think the budget for the pilot is probably in the range of $5 to $10 million, depending on where it is and what we learn during our initial experiments. Ultimately, our best guess is that it's going to cost about $500 million to $1 billion a year from 2030 to 2050 to reduce that 1,000 gigatons of excess carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. But if you compare that to what is an estimated of the environmental damage and economic impact of global warming, it's really just a small amount, 1/1000th. And where did I get that number? Well, back in COP29 last year, I was reminded that the less developed countries were asking the more developed nations for compensation. And they asked for $1.3 trillion a year, and somehow it was negotiated to the neighborhood of $300 billion a year. But if you compare that $1 trillion cost of global warming with the $500 million a year or billion a year for scaled up ocean iron fertilization, it's only 1/1000th. If we can get the governments of these nations to contribute that much to doing something about reversing the problem instead of just adapting to it, that would be something. So as I said, we are a 501c3 nonprofit. Our paperwork is pending with the IRS, maybe delayed a little due to the current government shutdown, but the last I looked before the shutdown, they were estimating their turnaround time to be in the neighborhood of December. So we should have that paperwork eventually. We have a great team. Tan, our Chief Executive Officer, has worked on ocean iron fertilization project in the past. I'm an environmental engineer. I've worked on a lot of environmental impact assessments and Superfund site cleanup. Peter Fiakowski and Carol Douglas co-authored the book on climate restoration. Dr. Burnham is retired from Lawrence Livermore National Lab. He's our Chief Science Officer. Joe Brabeck is our Chief Technology Officer focused on hardware and software, and he's retired from, I think it's TopCon. Marcus Cooper, our Chief of Staff, is ex-Navy, logistics, and air traffic control. So we have a diverse and very capable crew. So to wrap it up, and I think I'm pretty much within the time frame, there's too much carbon dioxide. You can consider that to be pollution. And so we've known about it for a long time. There's expensive and limited methods have been proposed to address it, but we believe the natural process can be scaled up economically, and it's going to take global action. Now, here's a QR code to get to our website. I'll also put that in the chat. We are welcoming charitable contributions. We are working to get additional skilled help in marine biology and oceanography and data analysis. I don't know if any of you recognize where this quotation came from. At first blush, it kind of sounds like something from a politician. The greatest failure of all is the failure to act when action is needed. John Wooden, American basketball coach, and I have to agree. So thank you for listening. Here's the website QR code again and my email address, and I think we have some time for some chat.
Well, thank you, David, and then for such a informative presentation. And that provide a lot of information about the potential of the iron fertilizations. So here and from the audience, if you have any question, please type your question in the Q&A. So here is the first one. Where does iron dust come from? It is a plentiful resource if this technology were scaled.
Yes, iron dust is a byproduct of manufacturing processes. Uh, I know one of them is they produce large amounts of usable iron dust in the preparation of paint pigment. So that's one of the pieces of research that we're doing is which formulation is going to be best for us. One that has been suggested is there's actually an agricultural fertilizer product that contains iron. We just need to do the laboratory work to see how well that would work in seawater and in large scale. So I don't think getting iron dust in the quantities that we need, probably about 100 tons for the pilot project, uh, I don't see that as an obstacle.
Okay. Any other question from the audience?
Oh, I just noticed. Apologies that the QR code on this version is the old one, but I have put the website address in the chat.
Yeah, they say the QR code has
It's expired.
expired.
Yeah. So if I had one thing to go wrong on this presentation, I think that's probably the only one that I think I can recover from.
Okay, and then the other question is does the iron in sunken boat, sunken ship help contribute?
Uh, Probably not in a significant manner, and that's for two reasons. First of all, it's probably going to stay deep unless there's some sort of an upwelling phenomenon occurring. And we do see nutrients brought up from the deep ocean to help promote phytoplankton growth in upwelling areas. But sunken ships are a very small amount of iron in the vast size of the ocean, and also it sinks. I mean, what we need is the iron in the top, several meters of the ocean, and it's unlikely that material, the rust, would find its way there.
Okay, and then the other question is thanks for a very interesting talk. This method will act for CO2. How about other greenhouse gas?
Well, we are aware that, for example, methane is a much more potent gas in terms of its global warming effect, but carbon dioxide is the one that we're focused on. There are other technologies that are being looked at for methane uh, removal, and we sort of need those to be pursued uh, by others because there is the potential for what we call a methane burst. That is, if the tundra continues to melt and a lot of methane that's trapped in the tundra is released, you could have a very sudden increase in global warming gases. So it's and there are a few others. I heard something recently that the propellants used in inhalers for asthma and chronic lung disease uh, are, I think, chlorofluorocarbons. I was kind of surprised to hear that, but so many people use these around the world. They're very effective medicine that there's actually a concern that they may be contributing as well, and maybe there should be a migration to dry inhalants. Uh, so uh, there are other gases, and others are addressing those. we're trying to stay focused on something we can do something about.
Yeah, then the other one is the one question is which countries spill the most CO2 into the atmosphere?
You know, I'm probably not gonna take a guess at that. I know that the largest, countries are up there. I don't know which one is the largest. The United States, China, and India and are up there. I really don't know which ones are in the top. But across the planet, even the smaller countries have had to depend on fossil fuels. And I think we have to be realistic that the uh, economy for transportation and synthetic chemicals and everything else is not going to change rapidly. So emissions control is not going to be the answer. And even if we did control emissions down to zero, we would still have the problem of the excess carbon dioxide in the atmosphere.
Mhm. And on an imprint, for example, the seaweed, an environmentally friendly substitute.
There is work being done on developing seaweed in they call it seaweed farming. Uh, I think this is maybe an appropriate time to mention my philosophy that let 1,000 flowers bloom. That uh, I think there are many different approaches to reducing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and I'm happy that people pursue many of them. What if it works out that ocean iron fertilization turns out to have some fatal flaw and is not really economical or scalable? What if it turns out that we need to do more? We need to have other methods readily available, and I am happy for other people to be doing research. I'm not against anything. I'm for anything that
Okay.
has the potential to help save the planet.
Yeah, the other one is the methane is widely used in ships, submarine around the world as fuel. How do we substitute this?
I'm reminded of the very first professional presentation I ever gave, in which during the question and answer period, I got a thermodynamics question for which I was not prepared. I have to admit to you that I am not an expert on fuels. So I
Mhm.
will have to uh, say right now, I really don't know. And that if you really want to pursue this, my email address is on the screen there. Maybe we can have a conversation about it. Might be able to look some stuff up and have a conversation about it later.
That well, the other one is the what about starting with ocean iron fertilization in area that countries own?
Well,
Well,
it's
I know you are
interesting.
doing it. You're doing it in California, that which
Yeah,
is
it's interesting you mentioned that. I mean, typically the economic exclusion zone is like 200 miles. And one of the things about this kind of activity we're learning is it probably needs to occur in the deep ocean. So anywhere where there's a coastal shelf uh, is probably not practical for this method. So you need to go deep. Uh, uh, Different countries are going to have different rules, but right now for our early experiments, we want to do something local where most of us in our team live. We can do something off the coast of California, about 100 kilometers offshore. But if you look at the Pinatubo area, the South China Sea, that would involve working with the Philippine Department of Environmental and Natural Resources. We haven't started doing that yet because that's future work if indeed that proves to be the most the location with the best potential. But that gives you an example that wherever we go, we will have to work with this. And uh, there are other projects going on in other areas of the world, other countries. We're not the only ones looking at this. Uh, it's going to ultimately have to come to the attention of the international authorities.
So if this technology proves to be highly effective, are you afraid countries will not scale back their CO2 emission? And how could we try to mitigate the JoJo effect?
I think what you may be referring to is sometimes called the moral hazard. The idea that if we remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, then we can just continue to emit. Uh, and that's a fallacy. Uh, in terms of what's going to happen is uh, it's going to be costly to do this work, and we can't just compensate for what we're doing and continue doing. And in addition to that, there's all sorts of other side effects from the fossil fuel economy. Uh, you know, downwind of these plants, you'll often have populations that are affected by the local air quality. So emitting this stuff into the air is a bad thing, and I don't think anyone should get the idea that by doing carbon dioxide removal, that somehow industry will be licensed to continue emitting. I don't think that's a good conclusion.
Okay. So any other question? This is all the question I have that the audience has posed. One question I have is basically you plan to drop the iron in a small amount in the testing area. How do they compare with the volcano eruption, the iron
Ah,
particle weight? So that is the basic how effective it would be, and then what kinds of result we are looking
this is some
for
of the
to see.
research that we need to be doing. I mentioned some of this quarter, we'd really like to get into the laboratory to work with some of the different iron formulations to see which one is going to uh, be most effective for phytoplankton growth, and especially, that it doesn't sink too fast. It needs to stay in the shallow water long enough for the phytoplankton to make use of it. So, of course, nobody was out there taking measurements of during, well, not that I'm aware of uh, the dust that fell into the South China Sea in 1991. We do have a sample of the terrestrial uh, ash that remained after the volcano, and we do have the analysis of that. I think I've got a report somewhere on file.
Mhm.
Uh,
And then also the other one is for the iron dust. Do you have to basically consider what would be the proper size of the iron dust?
that's part of the lab work we want to do. I don't know if you know what a sieve analysis is, uh, but we're really looking for something that is, and this gets into all sorts of questions that I'd have to go back into my academic work of about surface tension and small particles. But how these are going to behave in the water is part of the lab work we need to do.
Okay. And to the information of the audience, we have posted the past presentation that if you are interested in look at all the presentation we have, the link is posted in the chat.
Mhm. I see there's one more question about energy use,
Yeah, the energy use, yes,
and
that
that's
inside.
that's really beyond my area.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to share this. Will welcome hearing from any of you as Deep Green proceeds. If you drop us a note, we will put together a mailing list to keep people apprised, or you can certainly visit the website, deepgreensolutions.org, which has some of the recent activities we've done, and we'll probably be getting updated as we move along.
Okay, thank you very much, David. And Carol, are you going to give a closing remark?
Yes, thank you so much, Wei-Jen and David. It was a very informative presentation, and we welcome again suggestions for our next series in 2026. So everyone, please do not hesitate to contact us. And thank you for attending today. And remember, we have one more talk in the series in a month. So please join us again.